Hey David, how are you?
Great. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this movie.
That's cool. I'm excited to talk to you about this movie as
that's
well.
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So the thing I want to start with is just that there are some really powerful ideas being expressed here about class, about poverty, about justice, and some big philosophical points like trickling in, the Dostoevsky and stuff. Can you
Mhm.
talk about what it means to you? Like what the story in the film means to you in that light, kind of?
Yeah. So I aimed to make a non-political movie about how we treat each other and 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 how we deal with just the reality of living in such close proximity, sharing a street or a city with people who some of which have so little and some of which have so much, so unbelievably, so just tons, right? But to come at it from the perspective of how we treat people, leaving the politics behind. There's plenty of people who can discuss the politics much better than I can. But I really wanted um, to create believable characters and to create and it's impossible to make characters in 2025 that are even remotely believable or have dimension to them that you can't clearly guess what their political beliefs are around things, you know? And so I believe that is my job as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, to use restraint and to tell Eddie's story and tell Eddie as truthfully as I can about what I think he would believe and how sophisticated his beliefs would be and how thought through his thoughts would be, and then to tell William's side of it and how where he's at with it and how where his empathy is and where it isn't and so on and so forth. And so to me, like you know the that that's how I chose to handle their war, you know.
Did you, yeah, you laid out there just how much of a tightrope you were walking because like you said two things that really jump out. Like you don't want it to be overtly political, but it's impossible to create a character today that's not clearly political in some way, right?
And
So like
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah.
it's a big challenge, but I think you pulled it off, honestly. I
Thanks.
you keep the characters talk a lot about the social contract, um, and how people treat each other. Do you think that William is a psychopath? The character.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that he discovers one of the things he learns along the way in this movie that he learns through his time with Eddie is that he is a psychopath. You know, Eddie accuses of being a psychopath early on. You know that like there's like he accuses him of being a psychopath early on. It kind of stuns him, right? He's like, "What?" Uh,
But
uh,
then you're right. Later on, he is like, "I think I am Eddie."
Yeah, like, oh yeah, I think I should feel something right now for you, but I just don't. Like, I don't care. And I have no empathy at all for you. Yeah, that's I think part of his arc and part of his journey, you know. And it, I, you know, he was such a fun character to create and to play with, especially working with Anthony Hopkins and like finding that balance of like, you know, he's on a mission to have, he's a sociopath who's on a mission to have fun. And you know he's dying, right? So he doesn't he doesn't have to abide by the social contract anymore. You know, fuck it. Like he's gonna enjoy these last few months whether you like it or not, and and so he's having a great time. And so at times the audience gets to have the fun with him.
Sure.
You know,
Sick as it is, we do. I want to ask you because you brought him up, and I was going to ask anyway. Anthony Hopkins is one of the greatest actors ever.
yeah.
He's great in this, but you never expect any less. What's it? What are some things you can tell us about working with him? What he brings to it? maybe things we wouldn't have expected. He's so funny, so dark, so menacing. All of it is in there. Like all of his greatness is in this movie.
Sure. Okay. I'll tell you. I was on my way to meet Anthony Hopkins, and my mom calls me and she goes, I think you need to refer to him as Sir Anthony Hopkins. No, he's knighted, and I said, yeah, okay. Thanks, Mom. Thanks. And I was nervous to meet him because, I'm not like that. That's a tough situation. I feel like I'm personable, but it would be weird to be in that dynamic. So I was really nervous to speak to him, and he was the most like down to earth, playful, kind of silly. We were at this restaurant, and there were people around who were clearly looking over and going, "Oh my God, it's Anthony Hopkins!" And before we left, he went over and talked to them for a little bit. Like he was just like a joy to kind of be around. And I left that meeting going, I actually think Anthony Hopkins is going to do this movie. And like, I really think that's going to happen. And I got on a plane actually to come back to New York. Much longer story I won't waste your time with. And I literally left breakfast to get on the plane, and I sent him an email on the Uber, and by the time I got to the airport, I had gotten a long email back from him, just this long email about how excited he is about the morality play, about just about what we talked about and all this stuff. And then I got on the plane. I'm like, wow, I got this amazing email from him. I'm gonna respond. I mean, he asked me questions. So I like spent 2 hours probably writing this like long-winded email, and before I landed, another one came in, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm pen pals with Anthony Hopkins. What's going on? And we're like discussing like I'm sending him like really deep things about my life and my relationship with my family and things, but it's like adding to the character and the dimensions and like what the movie is that we're making, and so this was a script really well done by Michael Ross, but I think we all felt like, including Michael, that like it's such a character thing that like when we lock in an actor, like we want to organically sort of grow the script with that actor and sort of make it be right for them,
Mm.
So when Anthony Hopkins came on, I had a really collaborative thing with him. He would call me like every night for maybe a month before we started shooting. Like I'd be done shooting Bill's stuff, and I'd get on the phone with him, and we'd talk for an hour or two about our lives, about the character. He would talk to me as if he was William and I'm Eddie. I mean, he was just embodying this thing. Like his level of commitment, I learned so much. I learned so much from working with him that yeah, he is who you think he is. And by the way, Bill, I believe, is also one of the greatest living actors today as well. I mean, I watched him transform in front of my eyes, and people keep telling me, I mean, he's given incredible performance after incredible performance, and the amount of people on these interviews who have said to me, I think this is maybe his greatest performance of his entire career. I'm like, listen, that's it's wild to hear someone say that. And also, I was kind of feeling that on the set. I was watching him do it, going like, man, this dude has everything, you know?
It's such a the movie's so tight, which is nice, by the way, because it's not endless. It's like all on point. And you guys did such a good job, but it's really rests
Thank
so
you.
much on the two of those characters and those
Yeah,
performances. And they really are so good. I kept thinking, like, is Bill is like, he's invisible in this role. He plays
yeah.
so many different kinds of characters. Like, I, I'm curious, how hard was it to get the two of them? Like, you were the conduit, I guess, for the
I
two
felt,
of them
I
to
felt like that.
interact,
I
right?
felt
Like,
like that. Yeah,
can you
I felt
talk
like I
about?
was conducting the craziest orchestra of all time. And especially when the two of them were in the car, it felt like mayhem. It felt like mayhem. Like, and we at times would just, I would push them to like leave behind. I mean, you got these guys. I'm like, don't be beholden to the script on this take. Like push him, like piss him off, like do not, you're trying to anger him. anger him, talk shit, push his button. Like, are you gonna let him talk to you? Like, I would just goat them into stuff. I'd push them, And then what was so unbelievable was I had a month of talking to Anthony Hopkins every night on the phone, worth of like memories of things he would say to me as Eddie.
Ah,
And he said to me at some point on a phone call, he's like, your whole generation sucks, that, like as this sort of character. It made me laugh so hard when he did it. And then we're on set, and I'm like, you gotta say that to him. You gotta tell him this whole generation sucks. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, oh yeah, I mean that's who you are, you know? There's a class divide, but there's a generational divide. It's like the two of you couldn't have grown up in more different worlds and really couldn't you two are existing in two different dimensions of reality right now, and how could you possibly share the same space? This is what it feels like to live in this time.
I
And
it's true. It's like it's share a workspace with people who come from such a completely different cultural setup. What was possible versus what's possible now for someone coming into the world. Because they talk about privilege a little bit, but it's like the privilege of where the economy is or where the culture is, right?
yeah, and you're like, what's going on? How is it possible that we feel so apart, from these older generations? And you're like, man, look at what their life was, okay? Try learning the internet at 50 and 60. You know what I mean? Like, look
Yeah.
at what their life's been and where they spent so much of their life, and look at what our life has been, and even the younger generations too. It's like, how do we all get along? And how do we treat each other? And that's sort of, I think, what I aim to do or to
There
talk about.
is I don't want to go spoilery, but there is something it's weird. There's a vibe in the end with the two of them that's almost like the bond, that there's like a little bit of a like love, I want to say, or something that's like they've grown each other. Like, can you talk a little bit about where it lands? Because it felt very interesting to me. Like there was a closeness. I don't know how, like,
And
it was.
so it's deliberate. It's deliberate. I think that you start to see it the night that well, I guess I don't want to reveal that, but I guess you around the middle of the movie something happens and you really start to see it, and he's dying and he's
Yeah.
alone. And at first you're like, oh, here he is. He's this like sociopath who's having this, he's trying to have fun. But then there's this sort of dark night with the two of them, and you see that, like, in some ways he kind of just wants someone to listen to him. You know what I mean? And
Someone to talk to.
he's like, I got you in this box. Now I'm just gonna like talk at you for a while, Um, and 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 there's like a real sadness there, I think, and and uh and and so there's a weird hint of vulnerability in all of that, in that kind of moment of like, all right, and so, I think the two of them have sort of been through this together in a way, and yeah, I mean, I think I think they both go through their lives, only being partially seen for who they are, and I think they're sitting in a box with someone who sees the whole of them finally,
I Yeah, I think I think there's a message here about you can learn from the person you hate the most, maybe. Like, because they learn that, like, it never, it's beautifully unarticulated. Like, you leave it a little bit,
Yeah.
but if we pick it up at the end, it's that Eddie really learned something. Like,
I
as
think
horrible as it was, like he was given a gift.
so. I'm a fan of finding really pop, silly metaphors or whatever that like really have like a lot of emotional weight or depth. Okay, and I can give you two examples of that. Okay, the first one's in the story. Bill is Um, he starts the movie, he's a fart head,
Yeah.
and his arc is that he's not a fart head anymore, you know? Which is so stupid on the surface, but when you look down below, what that means is that, you know, he you know, he was neglecting his daughter. He was not putting her as a top priority. And so she, you know, she's called him a fart head and for it. And he had to go through a journey in which he, wow, I don't know how to talk about this without spoiling it, but yeah, I mean, he had to learn a lot about himself, and he had to get pushed to the brink to make really hard choices about what is the most important thing to him, what matters more than anything, and he really discovered something new about himself. And in it, he discovered his true intention for why he was neglecting her. He realizes that he had a belief that he told himself to make himself feel okay, but an understanding that it was bullshit, you know? Oh, look at
Yeah.
that. An understanding that it was bullshit and that it was a deep insecurity of his own. And
Yeah.
and a weakness within himself, you know, and that he glazed over. And so all of this like deep emotional like internal struggle that he had in himself really results in him becoming not a fart head.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, my favorite kind of thing. So that's example one. And example number two is really about is sort of like a weird. I don't know. I don't know if I should tell the story or not, but I will because it'll be because it'll express sort of what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
One of my first days on set ever. I was a production assistant, and I was like, one day I'm going to be a director. You'll see, right? And and we were shooting downtown Los Angeles, and I don't know what happened, but someone who was homeless, um, uh, during lunch came into set, and he took a shit where we were filming, and as the new
Happen.
PA.
I've seen it happen in LA on sets before myself. It
Yeah.
happens a lot.
Yeah. And as the new PA, um, on set, I got called in, grab a shovel, Dave. You got to handle this problem on set. And so I did it. You know, I went and I cleaned it up, and it was gross. But I survived, and I realized that someone had to do it. I'm the new guy, and I guess it's awful, but whatever. The point is. Cut to us shooting Locked. I'm directing my fourth film. Anthony Hopkins, Bill Skarsgård. I've become a director, a writer, and a director, a filmmaker. You know, the journey has been very long, and it is, you know, but I'm on the other side of that journey, and we're shooting on Hastings Street, which is like the roughest part of Vancouver, where there's a huge drug problem and there's a lot of homelessness around and stuff, and it's a tough place to be. And um a homeless person comes in and takes a shit on the set, you know, or like near our set, and someone had cleaned it up. I didn't know any of this had happened. Someone just told me that it happened, and I got like weirdly emotional about it, you know? And so I was like, "Oh my God, this is like some weird like full circle moment for my career, and it's like this weirdly beautiful metaphor for me, and at the same time it's about human shit and cleaning up shit, and so that's another example of like this big emotional arc sort of being signified by these things that on the surface look very silly and pulp and whatever. So
I
anyway, that's
yeah, we have to wrap, but what I love about that
right.
story is that your brain works in a way that bookends events for narrative structure.
Oh, it
Like you
100%
see
does.
everything in that way, and that's why that's why your movie works because it's created around that type of bookended structure where it's like all that crazy stuff, but there's a rather simple, beautiful little arc there that
I want to say that over the course of my journey of becoming a filmmaker and becoming a storyteller, you know, and going from someone who makes pretty shots in music videos to like really telling stories and stuff. I've come to see the world through the lens of like our entire understand. I mean, this is for a longer podcast. Maybe we'll talk about it next time. But our entire understanding of who we are as people, like who I am, is just a series of stories I've told myself, and who you are, and what are my marriages. All of this is just stories that we tell ourselves. The stories, the building blocks of our own reality in ways, and so they're so important. You know, I read an article. Sorry, I'm just gonna say one more thing. I read an article a long time ago that these people escaped from North Korea, and when they talked to them about why they did it, why they escaped, they said that someone had sent they somehow got the movie Titanic into North Korea, and they watched the movie, and the themes in that movie seem so true and real to who they were as people, and totally defied what they were being told. Like the idea of sacrificing yourself for someone you love was so uh, especially a woman sacrificing yourself for a female was I guess was not something that was okay there or something. But that seeing that, it felt so real on a human level, that they suddenly realized that they were being manipulated by the things that they were being told, and they had to get out of there. And that's just from a story. They heard a story that had
Yeah.
nothing to do with that. And so that's why when I make movies, I don't make political movies. I make movies about people, because it's not politics separates us. But the thing that unites us are the things that we have in common, and it's these stories that we tell each other. And we've done it since cavemen. And so, anyways, I'm really passionate about it. I'd love to talk to you about it more. I'm
I
sorry.
no, I am too. I'm glad you're out there making movies and thinking this way, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thanks
Thanks.
for the
Thanks.
movie and
I
thanks for
appreciate
the
it.
chat. Take
Yeah,
care.
thanks. Thanks. Thanks.
Bye.